This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
أحييكم من جديد. أكدت السلطات الأفغانية أن حركة طالبان قتلت أحد
Afghan authorities confirmed that the Taliban movement has killed one of the 23 captured South Korean hostages. Meanwhile, an Afghan official announced that a German journalist and his interpreter have been released after having been kidnapped earlier today in eastern Afghanistan.
As Seoul announced that it is following up on its direct contacts with the Taliban movement to secure the release of the 23 South Korean hostages, South Korean ministers of defense and foreign affairs reassured the public that the hostages are in good health during a parliamentary session.
The hostages are not suffering from health problems. There was someone who was suffering from something simple. Luckily, he is now in good health after his colleague was allowed to care for him.
We will work closely with the United States to guarantee that the military forces will not be used to free them.
The crisis preoccupied the local press and the South Korean public. There is talk that the government is trying to secure the release of the female hostages. For its part, the Taliban announced that it is running out of patience amidst a stall in the negotiations, and it threatened to kill hostages if the Afghan government does not release 8 Taliban prisoners.
The Taliban has lost its patience. The South Korean hostages will be killed 100% because a lot of time has passed since the deadline and there is no response from the negotiating authorities.
Certain people said that some of the statements made by the Taliban spokesman were untrue. One of the local Afghan police chiefs said that the negotiations are on the right path despite the passing of 3 deadlines set by the Taliban that would have determined the fate of the hostages. Adnan Aboud, Al-Arabiya.
The Taliban condemned what a White House National Security Advisor said about the possibility of using military force against the movement's bases in Pakistan. One leader of the Taliban, Juma Khan, confirmed that the movement is determined to pursue the Americans until the United States is eliminated because, he said, it has not reduced its efforts to weaken Muslims throughout the world. Khan vowed to continue to fight the Americans until his last breath.
Al Jazeera correspondent in Islamabad quoted tribal spokesmen saying that hundreds of families started fleeing from northern Wazirustan to nearby areas after receiving warnings from the army about a plan to launch a military operation to arrest the perpetrators who have been attacking military posts and other armed groups. Meanwhile, 4 missiles landed on the city of Banu in northern Peshawar, killing 9 people and injuring more than 30 others, including 7 police officers. The source of these missiles is yet to be known. This came as mediation efforts between the armed groups and the government collapsed. Meanwhile, there are rumors that Washington may launch an airstrike on tribal areas under the pretext that Al-Qaeda and the Taliban are being sheltered there.
Dozens of people were killed and injured when missiles landed on the city of Banu in northern Peshawar. Although political observers said that armed members of the tribes usually avoid civilian areas, others held them responsible for the attack. The city's hospital was crowded with the injured and their families. Residents of Banu city were in a state of shock and anxiety as Pakistani security forces were heavily deployed in the area.
These missiles are being smuggled to the area undetected on the checkpoints at cities' entrances, although we have enforced our military presence there.
This incident came as mediation efforts between the government and the armed groups collapsed. Acts of violence increased as armed groups continued to attack government buildings. This came amidst concerns that an American attack on tribal areas was imminent. Political analysts warn about an American plan for Pakistan.
These theories that perhaps the Americans are trying to break up.
There are these theories that perhaps the Americans are trying to divide Pakistan into small states because this will serve their interests and future goals.
The division between Musharraf and the opposition has deepened, especially after the return of the chief judge to his post. Political analysts believed that this may tempt Washington to launch a military strike against the tribal region. They warned about what they described as repeating the failed American experience in Afghanistan. If this experience is repeated in the Pakistani tribal areas, the entire region may be led into a new era of balkanization. Ahmed Zidan, Al Jazeera, Islamabad. Yesterday was a day of celebration in Sofia, and today was devoted for public announcements. This news comes after 2 consecutive press conferences were scheduled, one for the Bulgaria's foreign minister and the other for the nurses. Regardless to what information the nurses may provide in the press conference, the humanitarian implication of this case is far too reaching to be overlooked. The nurses' case has ended in a mysterious political deal, and it may take many years before we find out the details. Fathi Ismail reports.
Was it a pardon at a moment of strength or the outcome of a political maneuver that helped end the nurses' crisis? It is not important to answer this question because the bottom line is that the 6 Bulgarian nationals have been released from prison and they are completely off Libyan soil. They were indeed given another chance in life, especially considering that they received a death sentence 3 times and spent nearly 8.5 years in prison. In Sofia, where the bodies of the nurses would have been flown, provided that they were executed, a warm reception was put in place for the returnees.
I am very happy and I would like to confirm that we are innocent. I also want to thank the Bulgarians and the Europeans and all those supported us throughout the case.
I know that I'm free and I am on Bulgarian soil, but I can't seem to realize what is going on here.
Amidst all the cheers and celebrations in Sofia, many unanswered questions are still floating around, especially by those who were treated unjustly. Meanwhile, the children who contracted the AIDS virus continue to suffer the consequences, not to mention those who had already passed away after a long battle with HIV. While the clemency deal has ended the crisis for the nurses, it did not end it for the children, even if they received compensations. Meanwhile, Libya denied reports that it has paid compensation for the children. In addition, the European Union and France's president confirmed that they haven't paid a penny to Tripoli. Having said that, Libya was happy to receive non-monetary incentives.
I want to take this opportunity and announce that my foreign minister, Bernard Kouchner, and I will go to Tripoli on a political visit in order to help bring Libya back to the international community.
It took nearly 8 years of political maneuvering to reach to this level of talks. Several factors indicate that the case was not a criminal one, but it was manipulated as such in order to bring it to this conclusion. As tragic as it may seem, the case has ended in a political deal that did not only guarantee the safe return of the Bulgarian nurses to Europe, but also it will help bring Libya back to the European sphere of influence.
The Bulgarian nurses' deal, which has many hidden details in its clauses, has caused a diplomatic coup d'etat for the French First Lady, Cecilia, at the Élysée presidential palace. Cecilia visited Libya twice in an attempt to resolve the nurses' crisis. Today, France's newspapers were preoccupied with this topic. They had good words mixed with criticism for the First Lady. Under the title, A Rebellious Wife and a Special Envoy, Le Monde newspaper wrote that the president is seeking to find a special assignment for his wife and that he has some explanation to do. Le Figaro newspaper wrote that Sarkozy is skilled political player and that he was able to bring a person who is stronger than a minister to the political game. Le Libération newspaper wrote that we have discovered an unprecedented and disappointing family diplomacy.
To Jerusalem now, where the foreign ministers from Egypt, Jordan and Israel have been discussing the Arab Peace Initiative. It's the first time that delegates from the Arab League have held talks with Israeli leaders. Israeli Foreign Minister Tzipi Livni said there is now a historic chance to move the peace process forward.
There is an opportunity here, and I believe that the Arab Peace Initiative and the dialogue with the Arab Working Group is an historic opportunity for the Israeli-Arab relations, but not less important, the Israeli-Palestinian process. I believe that there's a need to promote the process between Israel and the Palestinians. I believe of the importance role of the Arab League in helping, in supporting the Palestinians and Israel in taking the right steps in creating or making this vision of two-state solution more concrete.
Well, our correspondent in Jerusalem, David Chater, has been following events. He says that although the meeting has been welcomed by the Israelis, there are still a number of important issues that need to be addressed.
Well, an historic opportunity for the Israelis. It was a picture that was well worth it for them. The first time the representatives of the Arab League have officially met with the Israelis here in Jerusalem, an organization that has been outspoken in its criticism of Israel since its formation in 1945. It's been leading a major boycott of Israel. So the fact that those two foreign ministers representing the Peace Committee in the Arab League have actually come down to sit at the table with the Israelis, with Shimon Peres, with the foreign minister, and now they're off to see the Israeli Prime Minister, this means a lot to the Israelis. But what does it mean as far as the Palestinians are concerned? That's another matter. Everybody in the press conference we've just seen was emphasizing the positive. They were ignoring or putting in the shade the negative points. But it's those negative points, those details, which are most important. How are we going to see Israel making concessions when they object to several factors in the Arab League initiative? The League initiative talks about going back to the 1967 borders. It also talks about settling the Palestinian refugee problem. What are the Israeli concessions on those issues? We've already seen principles of agreement that's been floated by the Prime Minister's office here in Jerusalem that came out today, and that talks about leaving a substantial block of Jewish settlements on the West Bank, and it also talks about keeping control of the Mount of Olives in the Old City in Jerusalem. That's actually on the table now and being discussed between the Israeli Prime Minister and the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas. What is being discussed in the Arab League initiative is something entirely different. How are you going to pull those two visions, those two ideas together? Nobody in the press conference has said anything about that. They keep emphasizing the positive, but I say at the moment it would appear to be positive only for Israel.
David Chater there just a little bit earlier. Well, gauging Palestinian reaction to the talks is our correspondent Rula Amin, who joins us now from Ramallah. Rula, as David said there seems to be an emphasis in the press conference a little bit earlier on the positive rather than the rather big issues that are more negative.
Yes, but the positive atmosphere that prevailed in that press conference didn't really send the right message to the Palestinians here. People have grown a lot of apathy towards these press conferences and meetings. There's a lot of skepticism. People feel this was a futile exercise in diplomacy. And the blunt comment that we heard from many people was, this was a free concession on part of the Arab countries made for Israel for free, that Israel didn't give anything back for this concession, where Arab countries representing the Arab League coming to visit Israel and meet with Israeli officials. And this is something that's not only a feeling shared by the Palestinians. You can see it in the Arab world as well. Arab newspapers today, many columnists questioning the wisdom of such a visit. What can it achieve? We have to remember also in the past few days we heard statements coming out from Jordan, from Egypt, even from the Arab League, officials insisting this is not an Arab League delegation, but it's foreign ministers from Arab countries who already have normal relations with Israel, visiting Israel with a mandate from the Arab League. Now, is there a difference? Not really, but they are very careful not to appear as if they are normalizing relations with Israel before there is significant progress in the peace process. So here, it's a lot of skepticism. People feel this is just an attempt to show that there is some kind of momentum to push the peace process forward, but many people have little faith that it will really yield any significant results.
Mr. Ulmer met with President Shimon Peres at the president's official residence today. Following the meeting, the prime minister said that in addition to recent Israeli gestures towards the Palestinians, such as the prisoner release, promises not to pursue Fatah gunmen, and tax transfers, there are also a series of quiet understandings that have been reached between the two sides. He would not go into detail. Ulmer said that Israel was strong enough to take risks in pursuit of peace. He added that PA Chairman Mahmoud Abbas was also ready to move the peace process forward. Ulmer also called on President Peres to continue his diplomatic efforts, calling him one of the most important statesmen in the world.
And in related matters, on his maiden visit as the Peace Quartet Special Envoy, Tony Blair urged Israelis and Palestinians to take advantage of this moment of opportunity to move the peace process forward. Last night, Blair held a 2.5-hour working dinner with Prime Minister Ehud Olmert. Olmert pledged to be Blair's personal contact in Israel and said he would provide Blair with all necessary aid. The Prime Minister assured Blair that Israel viewed his task as one of utmost importance. Blair will return in early September and hopes to set up an office in Jerusalem. He plans to spend about 1 week a month here.
The Fatah-affiliated Voice of Palestine radio station reported that the PA has begun dismantling Hamas's special forces in Tulkarem and Bethlehem in the West Bank. PA security forces confiscated a large amount of weapons and ammunition in Tulkarem. The political advisor to former Prime Minister Ismail Haniyeh of Hamas said his organization's patience is wearing thin and that Hamas will get even with those Fatah members who fled Gaza for Ramallah and who are now instructing supporters to attack Hamas members in the West Bank. He added that Israel intends on assassinating Hamas leaders in Gaza, including Haniyeh and former Foreign Minister Mahmoud al-Zahar. Returning to the diplomatic front, and U.S. President George Bush held private talks with Jordan's King Abdullah at the White House. Topic of talk, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Abdullah urged Bush to step up Middle East peace efforts. The Jordanian monarch said the Arab peace plan demonstrates the Arab will for peace and coexistence with Israel. He also stressed that Israel needed to take confidence-building steps, including ending all settlement activities and easing restrictions on movement for Palestinians. Bush urged Abdullah to continue to support Palestinian Authority Chairman Mahmoud Abbas in his struggle against Hamas. The two also discussed economic assistance to the Hashemite kingdom.
Meanwhile, former U.S. Secretary of Defense William Cohen told CNN that the Saudis and Egyptians need to be involved in any Mideast peace process.
I think the Saudis have to be a fundamental part of this. There's going to be no resolution of the Middle East peace process without the support of the Egyptians, which has a peace arrangement with Israel, with Jordan, which has one. The Saudis do not. The Saudis have indicated they're prepared to recognize Israel. They're prepared to go back to these pre-67 borders. If we're going to have a regional solution to this, if we're going to have all the parties, the Saudis will have to be a part of it. They, after all, are going to be financing the rebuilding of the Palestinian state if it's created.
The former intelligence and security force prison in Gaza, also known as the Saraya prison, where many Palestinian prisoners were locked up for certain political affiliation, has witnessed new changes in light of the current administration. The new prison officials pledged to treat all inmates equally and fairly. Rana Abu Khatir visited the prison and compiled the following report.
ويحتضن بين جدرانه الجانب المظلم من حياة البشر وأفعالهم وحكايات.
This notorious prison is located in central Gaza. It tells a tale of horror about the lives of many who did not do anything wrong, but expressed different political views than those in charge of them. Many of the prisoners were tried and convicted in a court run by some who showed no sign of mercy or human dignity. The former administration of the Gaza prison has turned its cells into chambers for torture and execution. The prison was also used to lock up the leaders of our nation after being indicted on charges that were often manipulated by the security forces. The security forces of the National Authority have carried out an elaborate scheme of torture, physical and mental abuse against the prisoners. Some detainees' families were forced to pay bribes in order to get a new trial for their loved ones. To those responsible for this atrocity, you will be judged by God in a place that has a higher justice than that of man. The nature and extent of torture and abuse that the prisoners were subjected to have stirred strong reactions among Palestinians, with some calling for a change of authority. The Hamas takeover of the headquarters of the Palestinian Authority and security forces received a warm welcome by the prisoners, who expressed happiness and hope. In light of the current administration, the central Gaza prison underwent major changes. Consequently, the inmates have more food choices, cleaner facilities, and more free time to spend in the prison yard. In addition, the relationship between the executive force and the inmates is based on mutual respect. The inmates can now walk freely around the prison and spend quality time, including working in its workshops.
التغيير اللي صار في سجن غزة المركزي ملحوظ وملموس.
The changes witnessed in the Gaza Central Prison are remarkable and tangible. The inmates can go out to the yard and interact with one another. We sometimes get letters of gratitude from the inmates and their families for the good services we provide. It's our duty to look after the inmates. They have made mistakes, and they are here to be rehabilitated and pay their debt to society. Having said that, we must treat them with respect, because they are people who have rights and obligations.
The Minister of Human Rights, Wajdan Salim, said that detainees in Iraqi prisons suffer from crowdedness and have to wait for extended periods of time before their cases are heard in courts. During her visit to prisons in the Kurdistan region of Iraq, she said that these problems are common in all Iraqi prisons. She added that the central government has brought judges to detention centers to speed up the court trials. It's worth mentioning that the latest Human Rights Watch report has indicated that officials in charge of prisons in the Kurdish region use all kinds of torture against prisoners, who also have to wait for a long period of time before their cases are heard in the courts.
International human rights organizations and Human Rights Watch organization have confirmed that Iraq tops their lists of countries violating human rights. They called on the United States government to adhere to the standards specified by the United Nations. 25,000 detainees are held in American prisons and 13,000 others are held in the Iraqi Interior Ministry's prisons, all of whom have not been charged yet. Human rights organizations demanded that the United States adhere to the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1546 pertaining to the treatment of prisoners and detainees. Yesterday, the United Nations chief anti-torture expert in Geneva, Manfred Nowak, described described the situation in Iraqi prisons as extremely bad and out of control. A United Nations report including shocking torture cases that were documented during visits to Iraqi prisons. The report demanded that the American forces do not transfer detainees to prisons run by the Iraqi Interior Ministry because they would be tortured there. The Iraqi government was also accused of human rights violations. It also did not hold its soldiers accountable for war crimes and torture despite clear evidence. Images of human rights violations by American soldiers in Abu Ghraib prison, which was revealed by the media in 2004, were the most ugly and shocking images. Reports by human rights organizations agree that human rights violations may be worse now in Iraq than they ever were under the most brutal military regimes and dictatorships. We do not know if George Bush and his aides have read these United Nations reports, or else how can they keep on saying that Iraq is better than it used to be?
لأن الحب ليس له وطن ولا يعرف الحدود.
Because love belongs to no country and does not know any borders, one Spanish peacekeeping soldier returned to Lebanon after completing his mission to marry the woman he loves. This scenario, full of love, which includes Romeo, the Spaniard, and Juliet, the Lebanese, took place in the Lebanese village of Marjayoun. We leave the details with Adr Qada.
نترك التفاصيل مع عبد القادر.
How happy are the moments when love brings two displaced people together during a crisis of war? How much happier would they be if the bride and the groom were recruited for the sake of love and peace? Quite simply, it is a true love story between José Antonio, a Spanish soldier working for the UNIFIL in southern Lebanon, and the Dunya Atallah from Marj al-Ayoun. They fulfilled their dream of marrying after 1 year of love.
I used to work at a military fatigue store called Commando, and he is from UNIFIL. So he came to the store and I met him there. We liked each other. Before he left, we agreed that we must get married. He left for 5 months. We were always in contact through the internet and on the phone. Then he fulfilled his promise and returned. Everything is great between us.
As the saying goes, something good can come from something bad. Perhaps this applies to Antonio, since the latest war on Lebanon helped him find his companion in life despite the tense atmosphere which continues to overshadow life in southern Lebanon, and despite the differences in the lovers' language and culture. The language of love and peace crosses all borders without the need of a passport and speaks louder than any language or culture.
I met her at the beginning of my mission in Lebanon. I promised to return and marry her.
This may not be the first story of marriage between a foreign soldier and a Lebanese citizen, but according to the intimate details, it appears to be the most credible and noble when compared to similar stories. The man made a promise and he fulfilled his promise.
He was very honest with her. He traveled and continued talking to her. He told her that he would return. He came back and they got married. They are very happy now.
The bride's family respected and honored the man's honesty. The family held for them a wedding which had the aura of a Lebanese village, despite the cluster bombs and landmines that exploded there from time to time. We congratulate the bride and groom with the hope that their story will serve as a model for love and peace. But will peace return to Lebanon just as this man returned to his love?
The views expressed on Mosaic are those of the participating broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. Please visit linktv.org/Mosaic for more information about these broadcasters, or to view previous Mosaic programs, obtain program transcripts, or receive the weekly Mosaic Intelligence Report. Mosaic is made possible by a grant from the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Additional support is provided by the Firedoll Foundation, the Otto Haas Charitable Trust, and by committed Link TV viewers like you. If you value this program, please send your tax-deductible contribution to Link TV, either through the website or the mailing address listed on your screen. This program was brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Link TV is the only U.S. television network devoted to global and national news, with uncompromising documentaries and diverse cultural programs. Programs which connect you to the world.